So we're going to talk about music and singing and conflict, and there's so many different ways we could discuss it over the last 200 years, but we're going to try to package it all under one broad category of a conflict that involves personal preference. So I know nobody in here has a problem with that. Personal preference for what you would like to see in worship and how that can become a source of conflict. So let's pray and ask the Lord for his guidance and wisdom, and then we'll talk about what the last 2 centuries has been like for worship. Father, thank you for this wonderful church, wonderful singing church with a great history, great legacy of congregational singing and musical worship. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about what has taken place in the lifetime of this church, the last 2 centuries, and how music has changed. Lord, it'd be fascinating to go back and watch how this church started singing in the early 19th century and then into the mid and late 19th century and the early 20th and through the mid and late 20th century. And, of course, now here we are in the 21st, 3 centuries of singing, and it has changed dramatically. But it has always, as I understand it, been one that has a church that has sought to do it well, to sing well, and to do what is good and biblical. So let us understand better what has happened, and let us apply these things to our own lives, that we can be robust and faithful worshipers in corporate worship. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, well, you know where I'm headed when you see this verse come up first. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Yes, sir. You know, I think that's great. We can shut the door and keep out the devil. So that sounds good. Let each of you look out not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others. There's a book that was published in the 20th century called Not My Church. And it was a novel written by a pastor who was a pastor in New England, and he wrote it with a fictitious church and fictitious names, but based upon his experience. And what happened in the church is they were going through what most churches were going through in the late 20th, early 21st century, is musical styles were changing, and there was generational disagreement about new songs and old songs and how they were trying to handle it and the conflict it was causing. And I used to give my students that book to read. They loved it because it was like reading a story. It was almost like bedtime story. And it wasn't like most of the reading you had to do in college. But it was a good opportunity to just look through the eyes of a fictitious but very realistic church experience of what happens when new music comes in and a young generation says, that's what we want to sing. We need to sing more of that. And an old generation says, but that's not real music. We need to do our music. And then there's the back and forth over what is appropriate, what's good and right. Well, this verse is a helpful reminder of how we're supposed to approach everything in the kingdom of God, worship included. That when we think about the subject of music, we're called to have the same attitude towards it that we would have towards anything else that God puts in front of us. And that is an attitude that desires to see the benefit of others. And that's what was neat about this book, is as they went through their story, this Not My Church book, they began to see the needs of the other generation. From the older folks, it was the younger folks, and from the younger folks, it was the older folks. And they began to realize that the real win was not in what music was being sung, but that every generation was there and singing together. Is that just like here? It is just like here. And I'm thankful for stories like that end with a happy ending, because they don't all end that way, as you know. So Philippians 2, 3, and 4 is the appropriate place to start. Here is the conflict over the last 200 years. It could be actually over the last 2,000 years, but we'll say in our chapters here, having worship your way. I remember the first time I went to a Burger King under the new marketing slogan, "Have it your way." I had never imagined it, so I'm old enough to remember that when you ordered a cheeseburger, you got a cheeseburger the way they made it. There was no asking for something off or added or different. You got that cheeseburger, and you got that order of fries. And I was a youth pastor for several years, and one of the places that we took our youth group was to Niagara Falls for a Youth for Christ event in the winter, in the middle of the winter. It was very cold. And at the conference, there were so many teenagers there. It was during the heyday of Christian conferences, and there were thousands of teenagers there for these speakers and musicians. It was a really great, exhilarating time. That when it would let out for meal times, the place was overrun with teenagers looking for food. So we decided, after having had some difficult meal breaks to get food, that some of the leaders would leave the students in the seats while the event was going on, and we would go off to McDonald's and get food for them. So we asked the students, this is simple, right? What would you like from McDonald's? Expecting, because everyone knows McDonald's menu, especially a teenager, a number 1, a number 2, a number 3. What did we get? I would like a number 2, but without the mayonnaise and half the cheese. And I would like it to be a large drink, but a small fry. And so all these orders were coming in. There's like 60 teenagers with this incredible level of sophisticated customization. And so we got our reams of paper out, and we documented everything they wanted, exactly the way they wanted. We went to McDonald's, and we stood in line, and I think for 45 minutes to an hour, read off orders. And you know how McDonald's goes. They are just, if you get something close to what you ordered, praise Jesus, take it. We used to go through the McDonald's drive-thru on the way home from church with our little ones when they were tiny, and we would order pretty simple, basic things, not like this order was. And one day I went through the drive-thru, and they had gotten the order at this particular McDonald's wrong so many times. I said, you know what? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you $20. This is when you could get food for $20 for a family of 7, 8, however many at the time. You just give me 2 bags of food. I don't care what's in it. That's kind of what happens every week anyway. So you just give me whatever you want, and we'll just call it even. And they were like, huh? I'm like, okay, we're just going through motions here. But so we got all these orders, and we brought them back to the students. They came out of the session. Now, you would have thought these students would have been so grateful that these servant-hearted leaders had gone and ordered their food for them, brought it back to the hotel where they were staying, and hand-delivered it to them. But what happened? Oh, this has pickles on it, and I didn't want pickles on mine. This has cheese. I can't eat it with cheese. This is not a large. I wanted a large. All over the room, there's complaints about these little things that weren't exactly right. It was such a disheartening experience. But we've created that expectation in our culture. We've created this idea that you can have it exactly the way you want it. And we have allowed that to creep into worship so that when people go to church, they expect things to be the way they want it. And if it's not, they either notify someone so that it can be changed, or they go somewhere else. It's the consumer mentality about church life. And this is a product of the last 2 centuries of church life, where we have become more and more customer-centered in our efforts. And I don't think that's a good thing. I don't think that's a good thing at all. So let's go back and start the story from the earliest part of America. As settlers were first coming, what were they singing? What were they singing from? And how did we get to where we are today? And this is going to be rapid fire through the last 200, it's really more than 200 years at this point. We're going to focus on the last 200 years. In the 17th century, when settlers first began to come to America, to what became North America and what became the colonies, they were bringing psalters with them. You learned last week with Austin that the singing coming out of Europe was initially psalters, and they began to add the hymnals of Watts in particular, but some other hymnals began to creep in. But America was a little behind on that, so the purist left England, left Amsterdam came to America and tried to do it right. And they brought with them a psalter because they were going to sing only that which was biblical. And the psalter that the Pilgrims brought on the Mayflower, it was by a man named Henry Ainsworth. It was called the Ainsworth Psalter. It was the shorthand for it. It had one of those lengthy Puritan titles that no one could remember nor recite, but just referred to as the Ainsworth Psalter. It was a terrible psalter. It was very difficult to sing it off, but it was what they had, and that's what they used. They were singing the Psalms of David. And then soon after that, in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, they got the ability to print, because the printing press had been invented in the 16th century, so they got a printing press to North America and the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and the first book ever printed in the colonies was the Bay Psalm book. It was a new setting of the Psalms, and just referred to as the Bay Psalm book because it was set here in North America. There's actually about 4 or 5 copies of that left, maybe even as few as 3, because one of them was recently sold. And by recently, I mean within the last 10 years, because the church in Boston that owned it owned, I think, 2 copies, maybe 3, and now they have 2. And they were a dead church. They didn't have any money, so they sold one of the copies of the Bay Psalm book to make money. And it was millions and millions of dollars that they got for it because it's such a unique printing, the first book ever published in North America. So the Bay Psalm book was a psalter. But the singing was terrible. The singing in the churches was really bad. People are uneducated. They don't know how to read, and they really don't know how to sing. So they kind of bellow. And listen, we have great singing at First Baptist Church. Even by 21st century standards, we have great singing. And these days, there was nothing like you had professional singers, and you had common folks who wavered and quavered and bellowed and yelled. And it was a cacophony of noise. So they started establishing singing schools. This is obviously a little bit later than Pilgrims, but this is getting into the 18th century where they're starting to help people, hey, this singing's bad, let's get it better. Let's have schools on a Saturday where people can come in and they print these books to learn how to sing. And you can get some of these books still. They're still out there floating around. I've got a few at home, where they just are being taught, here's the fundamentals of music, here's how to sing. This was not for professional musicians, this was for common people to learn how to sing. And then the Watts hymnals were beginning to come over. So the Psalms of David was the first one, because again, we're trying to stay kind of pure, stay with the Psalms, but the Psalms of David, just like in England, was that first derivation away from the interpreted or metrical Psalms. This was the Psalms interpreted in the light of the New Testament. So he began to fulfill the prophecies and put Jesus into the Psalter. I'm sure that was brought out last week. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago. The problem with singing the Psalms of David is you don't sing the name of Jesus at any point. You sing about him, but you don't sing his name. So Isaac Watts began to fill the name in so that there were no guessing about what was going on. And actually, you may know who the benefactor was who paid to have the Psalms of David printed in the New World the first time. It was a very famous colonist. It was Benjamin Franklin. Yeah, Benjamin Franklin. He was the first patron to pay to have the Psalms of David printed in North America in the colonies, and so you can actually get one of those copies. It's going to cost you a little bit, but you can get one of those copies that he had printed. Yes, not that he was the most devout of followers of Christ, but he knew that the morality of a Christian nation was a nation that could maintain a republic. So Psalms of David, and then later, much later than in England, hymns and spiritual songs came across. That gets us close then to the Second Great Awakening. So the First Great Awakening happens before the Revolutionary War. It's the Jonathan Edwards Whitefield Great Awakening. The singing in that awakening is mainly Psalter singing. But in the Second Great Awakening, we're starting to get into meetings that are happening outside of the church buildings and into what's considered the camp meeting revivals. And when you get outside the church building, remember we've talked about this in previous lessons, the songs that become the new creative sources of devotion outside of the church eventually become the songs of the church. So We're going to stay very reformed and resolute here in the church. There's just only certain things that are appropriate. But over here, it's okay. I mean, we're meeting outside in a brush arbor, just a bunch of people gathering around their wagons, and that's okay. Sing some other things there. And then a generation later, those songs are the church songs. And just little by little, this continues to impact church life. It's actually kind of a fascinating thing. I don't know how we should evaluate that. We talked about that several weeks ago, that if what was considered by a previous generation inappropriate for worship becomes the appropriate worship music of the next generation, is that sliding or is that improving? Which direction is that going? It just is what it is. In fact, let's look at what some of these songs are, because you know some of these songs. These are songs that came out of the camp meeting revivals that were considered inappropriate for church worship at the time. And now we would consider them stately hymns. Brethren, we have met to worship. You can hear the camp meeting feel in this. I brought these just in case we wanted to sing some of them. I don't have enough for everybody, but I wanted to make sure that if there's one or two that we could sing, I had the notes in front of me just to remember the tunes. But this is one that I've sung since a child. You may have as well. Brethren, we have met to worship and adore the Lord our God. Will you pray with all your power while we try to preach the word? What's really fun with this tune is to do it as a round, because it's in this pentatonic scale. It sounds glorious. This is also one that would come up later in the sacred harp singing. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, where they would get around and sing shape note tunes, and they would belt these songs out, and they really are cool. They sound great. This was a camp meeting song, and you could kind of see how it would be. You were gathering around in this brush arbor to have a meeting, to get people saved, but the Christians are gathering to grow in Jesus, and they're singing to one another. Brethren, we've met to worship. Sisters, we've met to worship. Will you come now and join us? There's an appeal in the language. Come thou fount. You know that one. We've sung that here before. I'll let you in on my personal pet peeve about this hymn in just a minute. But great hymn written by Robert Robinson, who at one time was an orderly follower of Christ, and later became a Unitarian and sort of left the faith. But the words here are pretty fascinating. Come thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. You've heard the tune. Come thou this is a different tune. This one is one that you don't usually sing. Come thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace. Yeah, that's one that you've sung before. There's a verse here that I don't like, and so we don't sing it. That's my prerogative as the worship leader to do that. But I don't like to sing. So the words, this is, again, a different version of this, but the words at the end of verse 3 say, "Oh, to grace how great a debtor, daily I'm constrained to be." That's fine. "Let thy grace, Lord, like a fetter, bind my wandering heart to thee." I'm okay with that. But then what happens next? Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. I don't like those words. I don't think that's helpful to put that in your mouth on a Sunday morning. So we don't sing them. He does, but he didn't give it here. Yes, but that's already happened at salvation. So if I'm singing, prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, then I'm assuming that I need to have something done. No, you just need to listen to what's already been done. My heart's been taken. It has been sealed. That's the language of the sealing of the heart and the spirit in Ephesians, and I find that to be problematic. I'm like the only person I know that has that pet peeve about this song. Every other church in the world sings this hymn. We've sung it, but we skip that verse. We sing other verses. There's other verses in there. And my point is, you know what? Maybe he did feel prone to wander, because he did. He left the faith. So, yes, it worked on him. So that's my pet peeve there. That's why we don't sing it. All right, then there came folk hymnody. The folk songs, just like for Luther in his day, folk songs in America became an easily sung tune that you could take words and put to. And from this, we get hymns like What Wondrous Love Is This, which I love that hymn. I think it's a beautiful hymn, and I'm all in on that one. No hesitation there. This one is, I love this this text, but we don't sing it here, and honestly, I've only ever heard it sung by choirs. But has anyone ever heard the song Lord of the Dance? Hey, look, you do. We have people to hear. Let's all stand up and sing it. Those of you that It is a tune that you would know because it's to the tune of the Shaker melody. 'Tis a gift to be simple. 'Tis a gift. You know that. That's the tune here. I danced in the morning when the world was begun, and I danced in the moon and the stars and the sun. And I came down from heaven, and I danced on the earth. At Bethlehem I had my birth. Dance then wherever you may be. I am the Lord of the dance, said he. That's a nice tune, and it's catchy. It's been set to a number of different texts. That one was one that caught on and got printed during the 19th century during this folk hymn that he moved in. What was that?
They do Irish jigs.
Irish jigs, okay. Why not? Shape note singing. I mentioned that a few minutes ago. Shape note singers, there's a particular group. There's two types. As far as I understand, there are two different types of shape note singers. There are 4 shaped singers and then 7. So you have 2 different approaches. The fa sol la singers, which have the 4 shapes, they sing like sacred harp singers. If you've ever been to a sacred harp singing, which are still prevalent today, you can actually go on a website now and find out where sacred harp singing is going on in America this weekend and go attend it. There's an oblong book that was published in the early 19th century. I think 1844 was the first one, called the Sacred Harp Singing Book, and it has 4 lines of singing, and the notes are on the staff like you would read regular music, but the note head is a shape. There's like a triangle and a square and a circle, and each of those shapes is a different pitch on the scale. Remember I talked about how they were trying to improve singing? So they use this approach to singing to help people learn how to sing the notes without learning how to read the music. So these fa sol la singers, these sacred harp singers, know how to read it because of the shape. They're not looking at where it is on the scale. They see the triangle, and they know what part of the scale that is. I did sacred harp singing one time. It was part of an assignment I had when I was in seminary. And I joined a group of sacred harp singers. And I was a trained musician, had an undergraduate, and was working on a master's degree in music. And these folks sang circles around me. I mean, they could sing, and they sang heartily. It was really a delight. From the sacred harp, or the shape note singing, we get tunes like How Firm a Foundation and Amazing Grace came into our country through shape note singing. In fact, the Southern Harmony book is where it got wed to the tune New Britain. So we got the English tune from John Newton coming across the Atlantic and getting wed to that tune New Britain that we know it with now. And they sang it here first. And now it's the most popular tune in the world for that text. And I think it's fascinating that John Newton never heard it with that tune. Okay, so those are some examples of kind of how some singing's going on out here away from the services, and then they're getting brought in. The concept here was, let's give people devotional singing where they can get the text in their head and in their heart, and then little by little they creep into the service. We're looking at songs here that wouldn't have been allowed in the service when they were first printed, and today they are our traditional hymns. So that is fascinating how that happens. Then we get denominational hymns and denominational hymn books. So they continue to sort of splinter a little bit as far as how we're writing songs. And we have, I gave some examples here of different denominations and where they came from. So in America in the 19th century, we're beginning to see a variety of denominations pop up. This is now 2 or 3 centuries out of the Reformation. So we're seeing what was a rejection of the Catholic approach to church in general and worship in particular turn into these different splintering approaches. So Baptist is just one, but I did put one Baptist hymn up there. He leadeth me, oh blessed thought. Right, Maddie, remember that hymn? Sing that one? Yeah, that was a traditional hymn back in the day, and we would consider it very traditional today. That is written by the pastor at First Baptist in Philadelphia, which is one of the early Baptist churches in America. Congregationalist hymn that you might know, My Faith Looks Up to Thee, or Jesus, Thou Joy of Loving Hearts. I remember singing these. These are a little bit more, for me, these are a little bit more high church hymns. My Faith Looks Up to Thee is actually a hymn I love, a beautiful hymn. Jesus, Thou Joy of Loving Hearts, beautiful hymn, but not a Baptist hymn. Like, they're in the Baptist hymnal, but that's not what we would sing typically. Anybody part of a church that would sing either one of those hymns kind of growing up? Okay. What kind of churches?
I came from the Anglican community.
Yeah, Anglican, yeah. That would be my thought too, Mary. What church did you sing? A Baptist church. A very, very highfalutin Baptist church. Dwayne? Was it for My Faith Looks Up to Thee? Oh, good. Look at y'all. When it was highfalutin? Yeah, I think it's beautiful. Baptist? Okay. Look at that. Singing the Congregationalist hymns. We're okay with the Congregationalist hymns anyway. It's funny, these other denominations, they give us Christmas carols, and we still sing those. So we get from the Episcopals, O Little Town of Bethlehem. We get from the Unitarians, It Came Upon the Midnight Clear. I wrote some articles on a couple of these carols a couple of years ago, looking at the history of them. And they're fascinating how these Christmas carols come to be. From the Methodist, and of course, if we're going to talk about the Methodists, we've got to go back to the Wesleys, but we did that last week. So you got full dose of the Wesleys last week. Even though they're Methodist, it's hard not to say that Charles Wesley may be one of the greatest hymn writers ever. So many great hymns from his pen. But he wasn't the only Methodist. Here we have Mary Lathbury's Break Thou the Bread of Life. Anybody familiar with that one? Yeah, beautiful hymn. And then from the Presbyterians, George Duffield's Stand Up for Jesus. Now, there's a Baptist hymn if I ever heard it. And the Presbyterians co-opted that one. They must have had a weak moment there. But my goodness, I remember when I first started leading worship, we had a pattern in the churches where I was in where you'd stand for the first one, but you'd sit for the second one. And if you got to that one, you couldn't sit down for Jesus, right? So you had to stand up. So I like to plan it second so that they had to stand up because, get off your feet. Okay, Little Town. Break Thou the Bread of Life. We already mentioned that one. Stand Up, and then It Came Upon the Midnight Clear. So many hymns. You can see what we're in right now is the fertile ground of hymn writing. It's impossible to cover all the hymns that are written in the 18th and 19th century because it's just the richest time of hymn writing. In fact, sometimes the 18th century is referred to as the golden age of hymnody, but the 19th century doesn't necessarily fall off. It actually does the opposite. It accelerates. It just accelerates in splinters, and so we have to be a little bit more judicious on what we're going to sing, because we've got a lot of different people contributing. That brings us to the gospel song. Getting to the end of the 19th century and early 20th, we get this song called the Gospel Song. And the best place to start here is with these two revivalists, Dwight L. Moody, D.L. Moody, and Ira Sankey. They were traveling around the country, telling people about Jesus and singing songs. And Moody was the preacher, Sankey was the song leader. This created a sort of formula for revivals, as you needed a song leader to go with you. Sankey took with him a little pump organ so he could travel. We weren't hauling pianos around the country. And I've seen a version of the pump organ that he had. It wasn't his, but it was one like it. And it really wasn't very much. It was a little sort of organ here. You had a little pedal that you pumped up the air in, and then you sustain it. It sounds awful. I mean, we would not today think it was anything that we'd want to sing to. But he would bring people to tears, singing with that little pump organ and singing about what Jesus had done. And it's this duo initially, and then many others like them, that make some of the most glorious gospel songs popular all over the nation. And from that, we get these hymns like, this was a time when they went by their initials. So Philip Bliss was P.P. Bliss. I think I'd have just gone by Philip, but here we are. P.P. Bliss, who wrote Wonderful Words of Life, the tune Man of Sorrows. There's a very extravagant story about Man of Sorrows. As he wrote it, he died in a tragic train accident. He was going across a trestle, and the trestle collapsed, and the train plummeted and exploded into flames, and he died. And this was the last hymn he ever wrote, Man of Sorrows, which we love it here. I mean, if we were singing Man of Sorrows at First Baptist Church, it's because Jesus is coming in a powerful way that day, and we love singing it. But this is where you have to be careful with some of these hymn stories. People like to dramatize these stories, and so there's a story out there circulating that they found his body with this hymn in his hand, dead, but there it was in his hand, this last hymn from him, which wasn't true. The train exploded into flames, so there was nothing found in his hand at all. I'm not even sure they found his hand. But so this was not the story, but this is a great, great hymn. And he's a great hymn writer. He also wrote the tune to It Is Well With My Soul. Not the text, because that was Horatio Spafford, but he was a prolific composer and writer. P.P. Bliss. That brings us into the Sunday school songs. So this gospel hymnody starts out, kind of camp meeting-ish, and then it becomes a little bit more evangelistic, revivalist, and then it finally makes its way into the Sunday schools. So we're having a concern for children who can't read, and so they begin these schools. They were schools to teach them how to read, but also to tell them about Jesus. And while they were in there, they would sing. Another place, not in the main worship service, where they could write songs and teach them these songs to sing them, because it's appropriate to sing over here, and then it sort of sneaks in to the service later. But from these Sunday school collections, this prolific writer named William Bradbury writes 5 hymns here. There's way more than this. He wrote a lot. 5 that I knew you would know: Jesus Loves Me, Savior Like a Shepherd, My Hope Is Built, so Solid Rock, Just As I Am, Without One Plea, and Sweet Hour of Prayer. These were Sunday school songs. They were for the kids to sing. Yeah, they're wonderful. They're wonderful. But they weren't for the church initially. They were for the kids. And, of course, then they make their way in. Similarly, Robert Lowry, another Baptist, by the way, writes these 5, in addition to many others. What Can Wash Away My Sin? So the hymns used to be known by their first line before they got titles. So What Can Wash Away My Sin is the title, is what's the title for that one? Nothing But the Blood, yeah. Shall We Gather at the River? Okay. Now that's what we got. We just called it Shall We Gather. There was when I was in seminary, a hymnologist came and led a hymn sing. And she had us singing different hymns. And I grew up in the Baptist church singing hymns, so these weren't unfamiliar to me. But some of them, like Shall We Gather, we didn't sing a lot. But she led us in some of these songs. And I tell you, it was moving when you would just sort of take some of these texts and just, without any instrument accompaniment, just sing the words. And some poignant moments. One particular song that she sang with us this way, and I think this is coming up later in our notes, was There's a Balm in Gilead. But she sang it super, super slow. And so we would sing, there is a balm in Gilead. I get choked up. Like I don't remember if I cried at that point in my life or not. But she sang these beautiful songs about this balm in Gilead that would save the sin-sick soul, that would make the wounded whole. And by the end of it, I was weeping over this song just because slowing it down and just thinking about this text. Yeah, beautiful. Marching to Zion. We're marching to Zion is a wedded text. Can we that love the Lord? The first part of that is actually borrowed from Isaac Watts. And then we get to the chorus. We're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion, marching upward to Zion, the beautiful city of God. So he borrows that Isaac Watts part, come we that love the Lord, and puts it with this chorus. And the irony is, Watts wrote those words to poke people in the eye who weren't singing, because it was a battle. And I think that was brought out last week. So he said, "Can we that?" Basically, if you love the Lord, you're singing right now. But if you're not singing, you never knew our God. It was a pokey kind of thing. No, not judgmental at all. Let me find that text, because even though it's an 18th century story, it's worth telling in the 21st century. Yeah, come we that love the Lord, and let our joys be known. Join in a song with sweet accord. Join in a song with sweet accord. And thus surround the throne, and thus surround the throne. And then verse 2. What's verse 2 start with? Some of you may know. That those refuse to sing who never knew our God, but children of the heavenly King may speak their joys abroad. It was pokey. Love the battles, the worship wars. William Doane, this is where we get the tune for To God Be the Glory. Jesus, keep me near. Boy, that's a beautiful hymn, isn't it? Jesus, keep me near the cross. It's a beautiful song. I am thine, O Lord, and pass me not, O gentle Savior. You ought to have a hymn sing right now. Some good songs here. And we couldn't talk about gospel songs without talking about the great Fanny Crosby. Probably the greatest. If Watts and Wesley, well, let's just say, we just won't argue. Wesley's the greatest hymn writer of the 18th century. Fanny Crosby's the 19th. I mean, she's the queen. And what she writes, I mean, just these songs alone. I'd like to write just one of those, and her pen was so prolific, all while blind. So remarkable hymns coming out of that 19th century as well. Well, that's almost 100 years of what we're talking about tonight. We got to get to the 20th century, and I'm not going to give you so many titles of the 20th century because time is fleeting. But I want to talk about the direction, because the 20th century begins to capitalize, and I use that word intentionally, on what began in the 19th century. The 19th century, we've gone from pastors writing hymns for their congregation to hymn writers or songwriters writing for outlets, revivals, and Sunday schools, and publishers picking them up and selling them. And there is money in hymn books. So what starts getting published is what sells. Now, it's been that way for a few centuries. If you look at old hymnals, almost every hymnal from the 18th century and 19th, especially the first half of the 19th, will say, brilliant new hymns of our time, including the hymns of Isaac Watts. Because if you put his name on it, it would sell, because he was the father of English hymnody. But now we've forgotten Watts, and we've gotten into gospel songs, and everything is about the new, what's going to tickle the ears. And we get into the 20th century where that's what we're doing. We are selling worship music, and it begins to get trite. And gospel music does that as well. In fact, as much as I love some of these old hymns, we don't sing them on Sunday morning, not because they aren't great expressions, but because they aren't great expressions for corporate worship. There are things that are very appropriate to sing in your private devotion, but is it what we're supposed to be singing when we gather? Is it what we need to say, I get 3 opportunities to put words in your mouth on Sunday morning, and 1 after the sermon. And that's it. That's what you get for a week. That's the diet that you're going to be living off of that week. If I give you something trite, some drivel, I don't think that's going to get you to next Sunday. I want you to have something substantive, something deep, something thoughtful. This is where we get into the personal preferences. Well, I like those songs. Well, that's true. Kids like ice cream too. But is that the right thing to feed them? Is that the right thing to feed you? So in the 20th century, we start to get a wide variety of approaches to music. There's African-American songs. And don't hear me saying that there's drivel here. I'm just saying this is the way these things start to splinter out. Were You There? And There's a Balm. There's the song I was talking about that brought me to tears when I was a seminary student. Lift Every Voice and Sing, written right here in Jacksonville by James Weldon Johnson. Great contributions from African-American composers. And then the influence of popular music as we begin to start to get into a pop music age where the entertainment form of music ceases to be classical or folk songs, but what's on the radio. And the radio starts steering the direction of things. And then what's recorded, what you can go buy and put on your record player or your tape deck. And this, again, it's what's going to drive this is sales. It's really not much different today. It's what streams now. How many streams does it get on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Music? And these are the things that, to this day, that's what's going to drive the content. A lot of Christian artists today, let me maybe rephrase that. Those Christian artists who are more distinguishing or more particular about what they put out or have determined that they need to be independent artists because in the 20th century, the Christian labels were bought up by the big brands, the big labels, the Capitol Musics of the world, because they saw there was money making in it. So then we have secular money-making CEOs determining what's going to be sold for Christian music. And it steers the church because the church just follows right away. So it's just what's on the radio. Because people came in and said, hey, this is what I hear on the radio. Let's sing it. I like it. I really like jamming out to it in my car. But again, is that what we need to be singing together on Sunday morning? And this quote, you may have ever heard the name Homer Rodehaver. He was one of those traveling itinerant revivalists, musicians. So he was like the Ira Sankey. He said this about gospel songs, and I think it's good to think about this. He said, yet the gospel song was never intended for a Sunday morning service, nor for a devotional meeting. Its purpose was to bridge the gap between the popular song of the day and the great hymns and gospel songs, and to give men a simple, easy, lilting melody which they could learn the first time they heard it, and which they could whistle and sing wherever they might be. He said, this is what we were doing. We were just trying to give you something that was catchy. But we weren't trying to give you something to put in your service. And then what did you go and do? You went and put it in your service. And so that's concerning. We need to be judicious in what we put in the service. And the same could be said, that quote could be applied to contemporary Christian music. I love contemporary Christian music. That's great. Listen, I'm a child of CCM. I grew up going to the Christian bookstore and buying the new music. It was great. I mean, it was great to have an alternative to popular music that elevated Jesus. But I wasn't thinking that it should be sung on Sunday morning. But what happens? It starts getting sung on Sunday morning because of personal preference, because of popularity. The influence of radio recordings and now the internet begin to steer what's going to be sung in the church. Which brings me to a last movement that I'll mention, and again, we've kind of blitzed through the 20th century, but the modern hymn movement began in the late part of the 20th century, where, again, judicious astute musicians started saying, we need to write things today that have the substance of the hymns of yesterday. So let's write new hymns that aren't dribble. Let's write new hymns that have theological depth. And that movement has really taken off and begun to be chaired, if you will, by the Gettys. So Keith and Kristen Getty have kind of become the poster couple for modern hymnody. But they are not the only ones at all doing it. There's a lot of people out there writing hymns today in the same style that they were being written by Watts and Wesley and Newton and Fanny Crosby and so many others that just intended to write healthy, deep words. And so I love the new songs, but I want them to be substantive, and I'm thankful for the movement, which is what was so great about the Sing conference last week. In fact, they're working on a hymnal, the Gettys are, to put together hymns from the last 500 years that will include new hymns, but will include the oldest hymns. Which, by the way, this Sunday, we are going to sing one of the oldest hymns First Baptist has ever sung. I'll leave it as a surprise for you. You can come find it. It was a 16th century hymn that we're going to be singing Sunday morning that we have been preparing and arranging this week, and we'll rehearse it tonight with the choir and the orchestra. But I'm excited about that. I love that. We're going to be singing a 500-year-old song, a song that's been being sung by God's people for 5 centuries. That's going to be fun. I geek out over moments like that. All right, let's look at some observations here as we wrap up to this evening, but also this course. Over the past 200 years, the influence of publishers has taken over. With that came the influence of revival leaders and musicians who were not trying to write music for the church, but were trying to write music that tickled the ears, that would draw people in, that would affect their hearts and would get them to turn to Jesus. Then it became the influence of mass media and eventually the internet. To this day, I get emails with YouTube videos attached. And that's the way we communicate, right? It's an easy way to say, hey, do this song. Thank you. I'll take a look at it. And I do. I always take a look at it. The battle that must be waged is that between public opinion and biblical authority. Now, this has to be waged appropriately. There is an aspect of a personal preference that has to be understood. I would not sing certain styles of music here that I might have sung at a different church because I know that's not your style. That's not our style. First thing I did when I got here was have the team tell me, okay, who is First Baptist musically? Tell me, and lots of people wanting to tell me, but the music team, tell me who is First Baptist musically? What are the types of songs that First Baptist gets excited about singing? That's important for me to understand. Every church is a little different that way. Some churches are vastly different. So that part is important to understand, and I think that part is important to cater to, if you will. But if I went around the room and said, okay, we're going to sing John's favorite song this morning, we're going to sing Larry's favorite song on Sunday, and we're going to sing Aletha's favorite song. And listen, I'm going to get myself in some serious trouble trying to do that. If I try to sing everybody's favorite song, I'm going to have one person happy with me and 99 others come and saying, why in the world do we sing that? Well, because John Artemis's favorite song. Don't you like John Artemis? He's got favorite songs. Well, I don't want to sing John's favorite song. I want to sing my favorite song. So that's where we get into trouble, trying to cater to the preferences. There has to be some biblical authority put into play here. It's never been healthy for worship to be shaped by personal preference. One church that I led 4 years ago was when I was a professor at seminary at Southern. I was doing an interim, and I had someone come to me and tell me that, hey, this church sings contemporary music. Okay, contemporary. So they were in a place to know. I thought, I'll do some contemporary music. Next Sunday, no, we do contemporary music. Okay, well, that's what I just did. Oh, no, you didn't do contemporary. We do contemporary music. Well, even that's just a weird word. Like, what does that mean to you? What does that mean to me? What I ultimately found out after several weeks of swinging and missing at his pitches was that he meant songs from the 90s. This was in 2012, 2013. That was contemporary to him. And so he thought I should understand that that's what they were. And I had to explain to him that's actually not contemporary, at least not in a technical sense. That's a fad that came and went about 15 years ago. But now I know, so thank you for letting me know. And we're not singing those songs because those are stupid songs. But that everything has a connotation. Which brings us back around. The humility and the nature of a servant are required to worship God rightly. So this is not just about music. This is about worship in general. It requires humility. It requires the nature of a Philippians 2, mind of Christ's servant, that comes into worship and says, Lord, here I am, and I want to worship you. And whatever that guy up there puts on the screen for me to sing, I'm going to use those words to glorify you. And I'm going to learn these songs, and I'm going to sing them to the top of my lungs. And I'm going to love you well. And if it's not my favorite music, it's someone else's. And I'm thankful that it is. Yes, sir. Yeah, so I know that there is... it was. We talked about that when I first got here. We aren't very good at it today. Just quite honestly, we don't have a lot of those musicians left. I think there's a place for it. I have reservations on some of the texts. So I don't think it makes for good congregational music. I think it makes for better listening to music. So when I would go back and watch the videos of the Southern Gospel songs, most of the time it was the stage people singing and not the congregation singing. Southern congregation was doing that, yeah, which is fine.
Some of the Gaither songs were, put in the Baptist hymnal.
They did.
At that time, and they were accepted as congregational singers.
They have been. So they've picked those carefully. Because He Lives, which we still sing today. Actually, I almost pulled out Family of God this past Sunday because we were talking about, the last part of Philippians and how we're to have these relationships. And I almost pulled it out, and I wasn't sure that you all had sung it. But I found out later that you had sung it somewhere back in the day. I'm so glad I'm a part of the family of God. I've been watching the fountain cleansed by His blood. Do you remember that one? Y'all sing that one here? Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. Yes, that has kind of sort of a modern Southern Gospel flair, a little country twang. There was some twanging going on. See if that meets some of the desire. Every year we've tried to do something, more than one something. We tried to do something that kind of harkens to the Southern Gospel flair. I just realized I don't have that quartet anymore. I mean, if I'm singing in a quartet at the last concert we did in June, it's because we don't have that group here anymore. Because I'm not strong at that. When we sang It Is Finished. Okay, the last thing I'm supposed to do with you is a midweek course survey. This is not about your favorite songs. This is about how this course went for you and what you'd like to contribute. There's also this little piece of paper. Do you all have this piece of paper? Okay, I don't know if it's at the back or not, but the QR code will take you to this survey if you want to use your phones. But this will give Richard and others who evaluate these courses the opportunity to know how this went for you and what you'd like to see more of or less of in the future. So if you'd like to contribute to that, that's how you do that. Why are we interested in this course? What are some of the most impactful things you've learned? How could we improve this class? And what other topics would you like to learn? Would you be interested in learning about in the future? Okay, any questions or comments to close out? Yes, sir.
I mentioned this, it's been on my mind today. Today is Dr. Whitmire's birthday.
Is it really? I didn't realize that. So how old would he be today?
Probably around 80.
Yeah, I think he's.
He was
I think he's.
He told us that 9/11 is his birthday.
Okay. You remember that? Yeah. I bet he's into his 80s. Yeah, maybe he's mid-80s by now. I can't remember how old he was when I saw him.
He's probably still going.
I'm sure he is. He's remarkable. Okay, anything else? Oh, that's great. No one ever asked me that. I don't know. No. So my favorite hymn is "It Is Well With My Soul." It always has been. So I love that hymn. And we're singing that coming up in a few weeks. I try not to overuse it, but I love that hymn. Is that my favorite song? I will say it is because it's my favorite hymn. I love the variety, though. Like this Sunday when we do the first hymn, this old surprise hymn, yeah. You'll recognize the tune. It's to the tune of doxology. Let all people on earth do well. We're going to sing that, and then we're going to immediately go to This Is Amazing Grace. So I like that. I like doing a 500-year-old song and a 15-year-old song. I just think that's kind of fun. Like, whoa, look at what the church has been doing for the last 500 years. And we're doing it here today in one morning. I think that's neat. Okay, I'm grateful for you. Thank you for attending and for participating, and I hope you'll sing on Sunday. It's required of you, whether you like the songs or not. God bless.